Evening light spilled across the glass-walled boardroom like a golden secret, quiet, refined, and hiding a storm about to rise. At the head of the marble table sat Vivian Cross, 35-year-old CEO of Cross Financial Holdings, hailed as a prodigy of Wall Street, and feared for her cold, brilliant mind. A woman who had conquered global markets, but never the silence of her own heart. Power had always been her armor, and her prison. Across the polished floor, the door opened softly. In stepped Malcolm Reed, the building's night janitor, a man in worn coveralls whose presence normally went unnoticed. But tonight, something shifted. His gaze fell on the chessboard in front of Vivian, not with confusion, but with the sharp focus of someone who knew the game intimately. With a smirk that concealed her loneliness, Vivian tossed out a careless challenge. "If you beat me, I'll marry you." She didn't expect him to accept. She certainly didn't expect him to play like a master. But Malcolm's calm, unshaken demeanor didn't flinch. "I play for real," he replied, and those 4 words cracked something inside her. As they sat across from each other, CEO and janitor, queen and pawn, 2 worlds collided. What began as a joke soon turned into a high-stakes battle, not just on the board, but within Vivian's heart. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control. And that terrified her, more than any business deal ever could. Vivian Cross had never expected to be surprised, least of all by a janitor. But when she issued that careless chess challenge, half joking and fully arrogant, she didn't realize she'd opened the door to a world she'd never known. Sitting across from her wasn't just a man in gray coveralls. Malcolm Reed was calm, focused, and precise, his every move on the chessboard laced with silent depth. Vivian, who had spent her life mastering financial warfare, found herself on unstable ground. At first, she believed she had the upper hand. Her opening was aggressive, clean, meant to intimidate. But Malcolm didn't play with bravado. He played with experience, quiet and strategic. Move after move. She felt her control slipping, her pride cracking. And by the 21st move, her king was trapped, unable to escape. Checkmate. She sat in stunned silence, as Malcolm respectfully stood, gently resetting the board. He didn't mock her. He didn't gloat. He simply whispered, "Thank you for the game. It's been a long time since I felt fully like myself." That line haunted her. Vivian's curiosity, once academic, became deeply personal. Who was this man who could match her in intellect and outmatch her in soul? Her investigation revealed a buried truth. Malcolm Reed was once an international chess master, a child prodigy dubbed America's next great hope. But tragedy shattered that path. His wife, Lisa, had died of cancer, and their young daughter, Naomi, suffered from chronic asthma. Malcolm left the spotlight behind to become a single father. He took the janitor job for one reason only: it offered health insurance to keep his daughter alive. Vivian, used to seeing people as data points and liabilities, couldn't shake the image of this man sacrificing brilliance and fame for fatherhood. She began appearing in his work areas by accident, asking about chess strategies, lingering near break rooms, waiting for even a moment of conversation. Slowly, walls began to fall. Malcolm, reserved but kind, didn't judge her. He didn't fear her title or bow to her status. And, in that rare honesty, Vivian began to feel seen. For the first time in her life, someone cared not about what she had, but about who she was beneath all that armor. Their talks deepened. Vivian learned of his nightly routines, with Naomi heating soup, reading bedtime stories, sitting beside her bed until she fell asleep without wheezing. Meanwhile, Vivian, the CEO known for crushing mergers and unrelenting deadlines, found herself reflecting on her own life of sterile success. Her office, her penthouse, her silence, they all felt empty compared to the warmth she glimpsed in Malcolm's modest apartment. One morning, the unimaginable happened. Naomi suffered a violent asthma attack in the parking lot. Malcolm's hands trembled as he tried to use her inhaler. It wasn't working. Vivian, arriving by chance, heard the screams and ran toward them. No longer the untouchable executive, she knelt beside him, called emergency services, and stayed until Naomi was stable in the ICU. That night in the hospital, as Naomi slept under white sheets and a monitor beeped steadily in the background, Malcolm looked at Vivian differently. And for the first time, Vivian looked at herself differently too. She wasn't a CEO. She was a woman. One who had never known how to love, but who suddenly ached to try. In the days that followed, their bond grew. Vivian smiled more. Malcolm opened up. Naomi called her Miss V. It was simple. It was beautiful. But their happiness didn't go unnoticed. A jealous employee, hoping to rise through scandal, leaked a video of the chess match, turning Vivian's bold challenge into viral mockery. CEO bets marriage to janitor. The press exploded. The boardroom turned cold. And her father, an icy titan of industry, issued an ultimatum. End it. Or lose everything. Vivian stood still at the crossroads of her life. Her empire or her heart. She chose love. In a public press conference that shook headlines, Vivian denounced racism, classism, and her own blind arrogance. Malcolm Reed, she said firmly, is not a janitor. He's a father. A protector. A master strategist. And the man I love. The fallout was immense. She was forced to resign as CEO. Her father disowned her. But none of that mattered. Because that night, she stood at Malcolm's doorstep, not as Vivian Cross, business legend, but as a woman finally unafraid of being vulnerable. When Malcolm opened the door, she said only one thing. I'm here. For you. For Naomi. For us. And that's how their story truly began. The day began like any other for Malcolm Reed, who had just returned to work after weeks of avoiding contact with Vivian Cross, the woman who had both awakened his heart and shattered it with words that still echoed in his mind. He'd told himself he was over it, that he had let go. But inside, the wounds lingered, deep and silent. That was when everything changed again. It started with a desperate call. Vivian answered her phone and froze at the name on the Justice DA screen. It was Malcolm. His voice on the other end was ragged, frantic. Vivian. Please. It's Naomi. She can't breathe. I'm at St. Mary's. They say it's critical. I don't know what to do. I had no one else to call. Please. Save her. Vivian didn't hesitate. She dropped everything, her schedule, her pride, her fear, and ran. Less than 20 minutes. Later, she stood at the entrance of the emergency room, her breath shallow from racing through traffic. Inside, she saw Malcolm hunched on a bench, his hands shaking as he clutched his head, anguish carved deep into his face. When he looked up and saw her, the expression in his eyes was raw and vulnerable. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know I shouldn't have called you. Vivian knelt before him, her hand reaching for his. No, she said firmly. You did the right thing. I'm here, Malcolm. I'm not going anywhere. She stormed into the treatment area and took charge. Her voice, once used to dominate boardrooms, now demanded resources to save a child's life. She called the hospital director, mobilized top pediatric specialists, and ensured Naomi received the most advanced care. Within minutes, the ER became a flurry of urgent motion. Malcolm watched silently, stunned, by the woman who was once so guarded, now fighting as fiercely as any parent. 2 agonizing hours passed. Finally, the lead doctor emerged. Naomi is stable. She's very weak, but out of immediate danger. Miss Cross. If you hadn't acted when you did, he paused, then finished solemnly, we might have lost her. Malcolm's legs gave way. Vivian caught him. In that moment, they didn't speak. There were no titles, no mistakes, no pride, only two people bound by love for a child, and the pain of what they had almost lost. As Naomi slept peacefully, Malcolm looked at Vivian with new eyes. You didn't have to come, he whispered. Vivian shook her head, her voice trembling. Yes, I did. Because I love her. And I love you. Silence settled between them. I'm sorry, Malcolm, she added. For everything I said before, I let fear and pride blind me. I hurt you and Naomi when all you ever gave me was trust. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Then, gently, he reached out and took her hand. You showed up when it mattered. That's more than enough. That night, they sat beside Naomi's bed, side by side, a silence growing between them, not heavy with regret anymore, but filled with hope. Yet Vivian knew that to truly make things right, she would have to face far more than just Malcolm's forgiveness. She would have to confront the very system that tried to shame her for loving a man society considered beneath her. So, just days later, Vivian Cross called a press conference. Standing in front of flashing cameras and skeptical faces, she took a breath and declared, Yes, I love Malcolm Reed. A man some of you mock because of his job title or the color of his skin. But let me be clear, he is the strongest, most brilliant, most compassionate person I've ever known. and I will not let your ignorance define the worth of a human being. She didn't stop there. Vivian called out the systemic racism and classism that had fueled the Calible scandal. She condemned the board members who had pressured her to cut ties with Malcolm. She even addressed her own past arrogance. I used to think success was measured in market shares and mergers. But I've learned that true strength is in love, sacrifice, and the courage to protect what really matters. The world listened. The backlash was harsh. She lost partnerships. Her father cut ties. The board threatened to remove her. But Vivian never wavered. Because now, she finally understood what was truly worth fighting for. Later that week, she visited Malcolm's apartment, no longer in secret, and not as a CEO. She came as a woman who had been humbled. Changed. In love. Malcolm opened the door, surprised. Vivian smiled. I'm not asking for anything today. I just wanted to tell you. I'm proud of who you are. And I'm proud of who I've become, because of you. Malcolm stepped aside, and she walked in. This time, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. The morning was crisp, the sunlight gentle, but the air inside the boardroom was anything but calm. At the head of the table, Vivian Cross stood tall, her voice unwavering as she addressed a room full of senior directors. These were men and women who had once feared and revered her, who had watched her build Cross Financial into an empire. But today, that respect hung by a thread threatened by one thing: her love for a man named Malcolm Reed. I want each of you to understand something clearly, Vivian began, her voice echoing through the cold marble chamber. My relationship with Malcolm is not open to your judgment. He is not defined by his job title or the color of his skin. And anyone who objects to our relationship on that basis is promoting racism and class prejudice, and that has no place in this company. Gasps filled the room. A few board members exchanged looks of disbelief. One stood and slammed his hand on the table. Miss Cross, do you understand the damage you're doing to this company's reputation? Falling for a janitor publicly defending him, it undermines the very image we've spent years cultivating. Before Vivian could reply, a deeper, colder voice interrupted. Her father, Frederick Cross, founder of the company, sat stiffly at the end of the table. His expression was hard, carved from stone. Vivian, he said slowly, if you continue down this path, you will no longer be a Cross. You'll be disowned, not just from the company, but from the family. Do you understand? Vivian's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She looked her father directly in the eyes. I understand, father. But I won't abandon the man I love to satisfy the bigotry of a boardroom. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian walked out of that meeting with tears in her eyes, but a fire in her heart. She knew the Fireblanks 2017 SEF storm she was stepping into, and yet, she refused to retreat. In the days that followed, the media turned brutal. Tabloids labeled her reckless. Editorials questioned her judgment. Anonymous employees posted cruel memes and racist remarks online. But Vivian stayed grounded. And Malcolm? He, too, became a target. Despite doing nothing wrong, he was mocked, judged, and ridiculed every time he walked the halls. Whispers followed him. A custodian who dared to love a CEO? People acted like he'd committed a crime. Yet he stayed silent, not for himself, but for Naomi, his daughter. He didn't want her to carry the shame of a world that had lost its humanity. But it broke him to see Vivian under fire. And one night, as they sat quietly in his apartment, he turned to her. Vivian, he said softly, you've already lost so much because of me. Your father, your title, your reputation. Are you sure this is worth it? Vivian took his hand. All my life, I've been called powerful. But I didn't know true strength. Until I saw what you sacrificed for Naomi. You showed me what real love looks like. I'd give up everything for that. And so, she did more than defend him in boardrooms. She took her message public. Vivian Cross called a press conference at the city's largest venue. Cameras flashed as she stood at the podium, not as a disgraced CEO, but as a woman fully claiming her truth. Yes, I love Malcolm Reed, she declared boldly. And I won't be ashamed of that love. She paused, scanning the crowd. Love is not defined by skin color, job title, or income bracket. And anyone who still believes that it is needs to examine their own prejudice. I will not lead a company that refuses to lead with humanity. The room erupted. Some clapped. Some walked out. But the message reverberated far beyond the building. Vivian's speech went viral. Social media ignited, dividing public opinion, but one thing was clear: she had stood her ground. People who once doubted her began to reconsider. Activists applauded her bravery. Working-class communities saw her as a symbol of hope. And across town, watching from his modest apartment, Malcolm held Naomi close as tears filled his eyes. She had chosen him. Publicly. Fearlessly. Later that night, Vivian arrived at his door. No security, no press. Just her. "I'm not just fighting for us," she said quietly. "I'm fighting for every child who needs to see that love is not a crime. That kindness is not weakness. That dignity belongs to everyone." Malcolm took her into his arms. "Then we fight together." The cost of love, Vivian Cross had learned, was everything she once thought made her powerful. After standing before the world and declaring her love for Malcolm Reed, the man society mocked because of his janitor's uniform and skin color, Vivian expected backlash, but nothing could have prepared her for the storm that followed. Her inbox flooded with hate mail. Her phone rang with threats. Former colleagues turned cold. And worst of all, the board of Cross Financial began whispering plans of her removal. Still, she didn't flinch. But what she didn't expect was the coordinated campaign launched by those who couldn't bear to see a woman of power choose love over pedigree. At the center of it was Jason Miller, the low-level employee who had first leaked the chess video. Smelling opportunity, he released more footage, doctored emails, and whispered lies that painted Malcolm as manipulative and Vivian as unstable. She gave up a $500 million company for a janitor, one headline sneered. Within the company, a faction of board members secretly worked to discredit Vivian's leadership. Anonymous accounts circulated racial slurs, classist jokes, and crude illustrations. Malcolm and Vivian, mocking their relationship as a charity case romance. Vivian tried to stay strong. But even steel breaks under pressure. One night, she sat on Malcolm's worn-out couch, staring blankly at her phone. She hadn't smiled in days. Her eyes were sunken, and her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she admitted. "They're trying to erase everything I built because I chose you." Malcolm turned to her, his expression calm but firm. "Then let them erase it," he said. "You didn't build all of that for them. And if you lose everything standing for something real, then maybe you're finally living." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had sacrificed everything for his daughter. The man who never asked her for anything but honesty. The man who, in a world that valued image, chose love, integrity, and peace. And that night, she made her final decision. She would walk away. From the boardroom. From the empire. From the name Cross. If she had to. The next morning, dressed in a simple white blouse and slacks, Vivian stood before the board. One last time. Her resignation letter lay neatly on the conference table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I no longer wish to be part of a system that sees love as weakness and power as privilege. I resign, not in shame, but in honor." There was stunned silence. Her father didn't speak. He didn't even stand. He simply turned his face away, too proud to admit that she had become something he never could. Free. As Vivian walked out of the skyscraper that bore her family's name, she felt a strange lightness in her chest. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor. For the first time, they didn't echo power, but peace. And where did she go? Home. To the small apartment, where Malcolm was folding laundry, and Naomi was coloring rainbows on the living room floor. When they looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, no title, no bodyguards, no chaos, just Vivian, their Vivian. Their eyes lit up. Malcolm stepped forward, confused. "What happened?" Vivian smiled gently, her voice trembling with joy. "I'm done being Cross. From now on, I'm just Vivian. The woman who loves you. The woman who wants to build a real life with you and Naomi. A life that doesn't need penthouses or prestige to be meaningful." Malcolm stared at her, eyes wide, heart pounding. "You gave it all up for us?" Vivian nodded. I gave it up for me. Because you and Naomi taught me what love really is. You taught me that no amount of power can replace the feeling of being truly seen, truly loved, and truly human." And for the first time, Malcolm cried. He wrapped his arms around her, and Naomi squeezed between them, giggling as she hugged their legs. That night, the three of them shared dinner in the warm yellow glow of their tiny kitchen. Laughter replaced silence. Joy replaced fear. And in that humble home, a new legacy began, one not built on stock markets or social status, but on love, sacrifice, and the kind of truth that no scandal could destroy. Vivian had lost everything society deemed valuable. But in return, she gained a family, a future, and a happiness more real than anything she had ever known. The wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't televised. But it was perfect. On a warm spring morning, sunlight filtered through the garden of a small house on the city's edge. There were no camera crews, no luxury chandeliers, no high society guests. Just a handful of loved ones, laughter in the air, and the soft rustle of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Vivian Cross, no longer the CEO, no longer the titan of finance, stood before a mirror in a simple, elegant white dress. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't putting on armor. She wasn't dressing to intimidate or prove a point. She was dressing for love. Outside, Naomi Reed, her soon-to-be stepdaughter, giggled as she skipped down the stone path with a small basket of petals in hand. Her eyes sparkled with joy and something deeper. Security. The security of knowing she would no longer just have a father, but a family. At the far end of the garden stood Malcolm Reed, his suit clean but modest, his posture steady, and his eyes fixed only on Vivian. He had been through the fire, loss, judgment, ridicule, but standing there now, he looked as if every wound had found a place to heal. When Vivian walked toward him, the world around them disappeared. Gone were the days of hostile boardrooms, screaming headlines, and whispered slurs. In this sacred moment, they were just two people who had fought for each other, and won. They didn't need elaborate vows. Their promises were written in the journey they had walked. Vivian, Malcolm said, his voice catching, I thought I'd never feel whole again after losing Lisa. But you've shown me that love isn't about replacing someone, it's about expanding your heart to carry more. I promise to love you with that heart, always. To protect you. And to build a life of peace with you. Vivian's eyes shimmered. Malcolm, she said softly. I spent years chasing power because I thought it would make me untouchable. But it only made me lonely. You and Naomi taught me what life really means. That happiness isn't wealth. It's family. It's quiet moments. It's sacrifice and truth. I promise to stand beside you with everything I am. As they exchanged rings and Naomi gleefully tossed petals into the sky, it became clear to everyone present, this wasn't a union of status or convenience. It was a union of souls that had survived the fire and emerged brighter. The days that followed were filled with a peace Vivian had never known. She and Malcolm settled into a life that wasn't polished or glamorous, but it was full. Vivian found joy in the ordinary. Making breakfast with Naomi, helping Malcolm fold laundry, walking through the neighborhood park hand in hand. For a woman once surrounded by boardroom sharks and icy skyscrapers, even the sound of laughter in a small home felt like music. But their story didn't end with a wedding. Together, they built something greater. Malcolm, with Vivian's full support, opened a community center offering free chess lessons. For underprivileged kids, a dream he'd long buried under survival. Within months, their humble program attracted children from every background, many of them drawn not just to the game, but to Malcolm's quiet strength and kindness. Vivian, once driven by spreadsheets and stock prices, began volunteering full-time at the center. She helped organize events, fundraise for families, and mentor young girls who'd been told their dreams were too ambitious. In their modest neighborhood, the former CEO and former janitor became symbols of transformation. Naomi flourished. Her health stabilized with better care and less stress. She smiled more, laughed louder, and even began teaching younger kids how to play chess, just like her dad. But perhaps the most beautiful change was internal. Vivian no longer flinched at her reflection. She no longer saw just the polished mask of power. She saw a woman who had been broken and rebuilt by love. A woman who had traded empire for authenticity, and finally knew peace. They received letters, some from strangers across the country who had followed their story. Young couples inspired by their courage. Single parents who found hope in Malcolm's sacrifice. Executives who, quietly, admitted their eyes had been opened. The world had judged them. But they had chosen each other. And in that choice, they became an unstoppable force of healing. Years later, on a quiet summer afternoon, Malcolm and Vivian sat together on their porch. Naomi, now taller and stronger, played with her friends in the yard. Malcolm turned to Vivian, gently took her hand, and whispered, "Do you ever miss it? The power, the spotlight, the boardroom?" Vivian smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I don't miss a thing. I've never felt more powerful than I do, right now, watching our daughter laugh. Watching the world change, one small step at a time. Malcolm nodded, squeezing her hand. Then I guess we're exactly where we're supposed to be. And in that sunlit stillness, surrounded by the simplicity of love, family, and purpose, they knew their story wasn't about status or success. It was about how far two people could go when they chose to fight not for dominance, but for each other. Vivian Cross had once stood on top of the world. Now she stood for something greater: truth, love, and dignity. In the peaceful days following the wedding, life with Malcolm and Naomi became the grounding force in Vivian's once chaotic world. She had traded skyscrapers for street calves, boardrooms for bedtime stories, and headlines for the sound of her family's laughter at dinner. But something stirred inside her, a need not just to live differently, but to stand for something bigger. Her relationship with Malcolm had opened her eyes, not only to the love she had nearly missed, but to the deep, toxic roots of racism and classism she had once unknowingly upheld. She now saw what so many others had long been forced to endure: prejudice that masqueraded as professionalism and judgment disguised as tradition. Vivian couldn't stay silent anymore. She began writing long, open letters shared online. Honest reflections of her past ignorance. Stories about the quiet strength of Malcolm. Observations of the hidden labor and emotional endurance of people like him, who carried the world on their shoulders but were never acknowledged. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Some mocked her, called it performative. A few former colleagues dismissed her as emotionally compromised. But far more people, especially those from marginalized communities, thanked her. Her inbox filled with stories from janitors, security guards, waitresses, single parents, people who had lived with shame and invisibility. Some thanked her for speaking out. Others asked how to stand taller in their own lives. Vivian realized she couldn't just tell her story. She had to create a platform for others to tell theirs. And so, alongside Malcolm, she launched a new initiative called the Crossline Project, a nonprofit storytelling and justice platform that amplified voices ignored by traditional media. They filmed interviews, hosted live panels, and created digital spaces where stories of resilience and injustice could be seen and heard. Malcolm's story was the first. He spoke not just of the chess match that changed their lives, but of the years before: exhaustion of balancing multiple jobs, the loneliness of losing Lisa, the fear that Naomi might not survive without health insurance. He spoke of the humiliation of being overlooked by people he held doors for, and of the power of dignity in silence. The video went viral. People didn't see a janitor. They saw a father, a genius, a man who had chosen love over blanks, pride, stability over fame. His story cracked open a national conversation, not just about race and class, but about human worth. But with visibility came fresh attacks. Jason Miller, the same employee who leaked the chess video, resurfaced again. This time, embittered by the couple's growing influence, he released a falsified report, accusing Malcolm of fabricating his past. Anonymous trolls and media critics joined in, trying to reduce Malcolm to a symbol gone too far. It crushed Vivian. She'd fought so hard to rise above the noise, and now it threatened to swallow them again. But Malcolm, ever calm, placed a hand over hers one evening and said, "The louder they shout, the closer we are to change." Those words steadied her. Vivian didn't respond with anger. Instead, she invited Jason and anyone else to a public debate, not about Malcolm, but about the systems that allowed stories like his to be erased. In the first place, Jason declined. But others joined. Former executives, community organizers, teachers, and even young students sat on stage with Vivian and Malcolm at their next event. One by one, they told their truths. How opportunity was hoarded, how intelligence wore different clothes than expected, how dignity didn't come with a title. By the end of the night, the room was in tears and applause. Vivian had come full circle. The same woman who once crushed competitors across a Grand Carré chessboard of global finance had now become a champion of overlooked brilliance. And she was no longer alone. As Naomi grew, so did the mission. She began writing essays, winning student awards, and even mentoring younger girls in the very neighborhoods her father once cleaned late at night. She told anyone who would listen, "I'm proud my mom's a writer now. But I'm even prouder that my dad's a teacher in disguise." One afternoon, as the three of them walked hand in hand through a local community fair, Naomi pointed at a chalk sign in front of a storytelling booth. "Look," she squealed, That's Daddy's face. It was. A mural made by local kids. Above it, a quote from Malcolm himself. No one is small. They're just waiting to be seen. Vivian felt tears sting her eyes. Not because of the mural, but because she had almost missed it all. She had once chased perfection, influence, and control. But in giving all that up, she had gained something far more powerful. A family, a purpose, and the courage to help others be seen. And in that moment, watching Naomi dance and Malcolm smile quietly beside her, Vivian knew the fight for justice wasn't behind them. It was now their legacy. They didn't need a palace. Just a porch, a breeze, and each other. Years had passed since Vivian Cross walked away from her empire to build a life rooted in love, not legacy. Now, on a warm summer afternoon, she sat beside Malcolm Reed on the porch of their small home. Naomi, their daughter in every way that mattered, laughed with friends in the yard, as the sunlight painted the sky in gold. Vivian turned to Malcolm, her heart full. "Do you know what I'm most proud of?" she asked. Softly. Malcolm smiled. "That we dared to love in a world that told us not to." And he was right. Together, they had dismantled prejudice, not with anger, but with truth. Not with power, but with love. True love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about standing beside someone in the face of judgment, fear, and sacrifice, and choosing them anyway. It's about realizing that no amount of money, status, or public approval can replace the warmth of being truly seen, deeply respected, and endlessly loved. If this story moved, you share your thoughts below. Tell us, what would you be willing to risk for love? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters in life.